The dry erase marker squeaked twice before Bev capped it and stepped back from the whiteboard like she had just hung a painting in a museum. 6 votes to 1, she said. Motion carries, Doris covers the balance. Behind her, taped crooked to the refrigerator, the room chart for the Nags Head house listed 4 bedrooms and 11 names. Mine was not one of them. Renee laughed into her wine glass. You do not need a bed, you need a calculator. Nobody at that table asked why a woman who was not sleeping in that house was expected to wire $14,600 into it by Friday. I picked up my phone, and instead of opening the family group chat to argue, I opened the camera and photographed the whiteboard. Not to complain, to file. Somewhere in a locked drawer in my home office sat a folder marked Meridian, and a debt this family did not know it owed me. One that made $14,000 look like pocket change. Tell me where you are watching from tonight and stay, because before that vacation was over, every one of them would learn exactly whose name was really on that house. The house went quiet around 10, the way it does when 4 generations of Lindqvists finally run out of things to say to each other. I drove home with the whiteboard photos still glowing on my phone at every red light on Route 9. $14,600 typed under my name in Bev's tight cursive, a number she had not once asked me if I could afford. My office is the small room off the kitchen that used to be a mudroom, and I keep the overhead light off and the desk lamp on because Alan says it makes the room look smaller, and I have never once cared what that room looked like to Alan. I unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet with the key I keep on my house ring, disguised among 4 others, so it never stands out. Inside, in chronological order, sat 11 years of receipts, bank transfers, and screenshotted Venmo confirmations, every dollar this family had ever asked of me since the year I married into it. I did not build that drawer out of bitterness. I built it in 2015, the year my mother-in-law told a table of relatives that I had married Alan for his family's name, and I realized nobody in that house would ever believe what I actually contributed unless I could prove it in a court of law or a Thanksgiving argument, whichever came first. So I stopped arguing. I started logging. Every wire transfer for the roof at the lake house, every check for Renee's daughter's braces that Renee swore she would pay back, every grocery run I fronted the week Walter's disability check came late, dated, dollar amount, initialed like evidence, because to me, by then, it was. The folder marked Meridian sat at the back of that drawer, thicker than all 11 years combined, and I did not open it that night. I only rested 2 fingers on the tab, the way you touch a stove to check if it is still hot, and I felt my pulse do the thing it does when I think about 2009, the year everything in my life either broke or got built back stronger, and I still have not decided which word fits better. I was 32 that year, 6 months into a marriage Bev had not wanted, living in a rented duplex on Coral Avenue with a space heater because the furnace was original to 1974, and the landlord did not believe in urgency. Alan was between jobs, which is a phrase his family has always been kind enough to use instead of what it actually meant, and I was working the loan desk at a regional bank that no longer exists under that name, watching men in good suits sign papers for buildings I would never set foot in. One of those men was named Errol Voss, and he came in on a Tuesday with a proposal nobody at my branch wanted to touch. A half-finished retail strip on the edge of town called Meridian Row, 4 storefronts and a busted permit history in a bank that had already said no twice. I said yes to the 3rd meeting because I read the numbers myself instead of trusting the summary memo, and underneath the mass I found a location that would be worth 10 times its distressed price the day the new highway exit opened 3 years later, which the county had already quietly approved and nobody outside a planning office had bothered to check. I did not have bank money to put behind that instinct. I had $11,000 saved from 4 years of double shifts, and a signature on a private note that made me a silent partner in Meridian Row for a stake so small Errol Voss probably forgot he'd signed it by the time he died in 2019. Nobody in the Lindqvist family knows that name. Nobody in that family has ever asked where I go on the 2nd Tuesday of every quarter, and I have never told them, because the one time I mentioned investing early in the marriage, Bev laughed so hard she had to set down her fork and told Alan that I was going to lose his future on a fantasy. I closed the drawer that night without opening the Meridian folder, locked it, and went to bed next to a husband who was already asleep, who had voted with his mother that afternoon by simply not raising his hand against her, which in that family counts as loyalty. Sunday dinner was at Walter and Bev's house on Larkspur, the same table, the same chipped gravy boat that has survived 3 decades and 2 kitchen renovations, and I brought a green bean casserole nobody asked for because showing up empty-handed gives Bev something to mention for a week. Renee got there first, always does, claims the seat closest to her mother like she is guarding a throne nobody else wants. 60 minutes into it, somewhere between the pot roast and the argument about whether the Nags Head house should get a 4th kayak, Renee turned to me with the smile she uses right before she says something she has clearly rehearsed. You know, Doris, since you love numbers so much, maybe you should just sleep in the car this year. Save us a bed for someone who actually swims. A couple of cousins laughed the way people laugh when they are relieved it was not aimed at them. I smiled back. The same smile I have used since 2015, the one that costs me nothing and gives them nothing either. I did not correct her. I did not mention that I have logged in a spreadsheet she has never seen $4,100 of her own debts to me going back to a car repair in 2019 she still calls a loan. I passed the rules instead, because a woman who argues at that table loses, and a woman who waits wins later, on her own schedule, with her own receipts. It was Walter who gave me the thread I did not expect. Alan's cousin Priya, who works compliance for an insurance firm in Raleigh and has always been the only one at that table who asks me real questions, mentioned offhand that her office had just gone through an audit that lasted 6 brutal weeks. Paperwork stacked to the ceiling, nobody sleeping. She used the word audit exactly once, lightly, the way you mention weather. Walter's fork stopped an inch above his plate. It was not a big movement. It was the kind of flinch you would miss if you were not a woman who has spent 11 years watching this family's faces for the tell that tells you who owes what to whom, and I have gotten very good at not missing things. His eyes went to Bev for half a second, and hers went to her water glass, and then the moment closed over itself like water after a stone, and the conversation moved on to whether the grandkids should be allowed jet skis. Nobody else at that table noticed, because nobody else at that table has ever had a reason to watch Walter the way I do. He is a man who has spent 40 years being managed by his wife into looking steadier than he is, a retired county records clerk who mows his own lawn in a cardigan and complains about property taxes like a hobby, and I have never once heard the word audit rattle him before that night. I filed it the way I file everything, without comment, without a raised eyebrow, a folder in my head right next to Meridian, because a woman who logs everything eventually starts to notice when 2 separate ledgers might be telling the same story from different rooms. I did not know yet what Walter was afraid an audit might find. I only knew that a man who flinches at a word is a man protecting something, and in a family that had just voted to bill me for a vacation I was not invited to sleep in, I had suddenly become very interested in what else this family had decided not to tell me. Bev caught me watching him and misread it entirely, the way she misreads most things about me. She reached over and patted my hand, the gesture she uses when she wants an audience to see generosity that costs her nothing. "You're being such a good sport about the balance, Doris," she said, loud enough for the table. "Truly, it's what family does." I looked at the fridge behind her, 3 miles away in my mind, at a room chart with 11 names and not one letter of mine on it, and I thought the sentence I did not say out loud that night, the one I had already started writing in the log, where I keep the things that matter most. They voted me a bill. They never voted me a seat. I smiled at Bev, thanked her for the pot roast, and started, quietly, to plan exactly how I was going to make this family read every single line of what they owed me. Bev did not ask me to make the deposit. She announced it the way she announces things she has already decided are settled, standing at the head of her own dining table with her phone held out like a plate she expected me to fill. 2,850, she said. "Say it out loud when you send it, Doris, so we all know it went through." I opened the app in front of 11 people and typed the amount into the little white box, and my thumb hovered there for 1 full second longer than it needed to, because everyone at that table was watching my hands and nobody was watching my face. Walter's sister Carol leaned over my shoulder to read the screen. Bev's youngest, Pete, actually took the phone from me once the confirmation loaded, green checkmark and all, and passed it down the table like a trophy, so his mother could see the number leave my account with her own eyes before dessert came out. There, Bev said, taking the phone back and handing it to me like she was returning a signed contract. That wasn't so hard, was it? I said it wasn't, and I meant it in a way she did not intend. What was hard was not the transfer. What was hard was sitting through pot roast for 90 more minutes with a green check mark still glowing behind my eyes, calculating in my head what $2,850 had once meant to me, so I couldn't count on my enemies. Back when I counted grocery money in the parking lot of a Piggly Wiggly, before I ever became the kind of woman who could send that sum without checking a balance first. After the plates were cleared, Bev asked me to fetch the good coasters from the sideboard in the front room, the one she only brings out for company, because apparently I still qualified as company in the house I'd been quietly financing for 6 years. I found the coasters in the top drawer, right where she said. I also found, underneath a stack of expired coupon books and a church bulletin from March, a bank statement folded in thirds, brown slightly at the crease like it had been handled and refiled more than once. It was dated October of 2019. It was addressed to Meridian Holdings, LLC, care of D, Lindqvist, and it had absolutely no business sitting in Bev's sideboard drawer. I did not breathe for a second. I put the statement back exactly where I found it, corner for corner, coupon books on top, church bulletin on top of that, and I carried the coasters back into the dining room with a face so still that Carol later told me I looked bored. I was not bored. I was doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with pot roast, trying to work out how a document with my maiden name on it, tied to a company only I controlled, had ended up in my mother-in-law's furniture, and whether she knew what it meant or had simply mistaken it for junk mail from a stranger with a strange name. I said goodnight early. I told Walter I had a headache, which was not a lie, and he offered to drive so I could rest, which I declined, because I needed 20 minutes alone with my own thoughts more than I needed rest. I sat in the driveway of our house with the engine off and the porch light throwing a small yellow circle across the windshield, and I let myself go back to 2016 for the first time in a long while on purpose instead of by accident. Walter's company was called Lindqvist and Sons then, even though there were no sons in it yet, just Walter and two guys named Ronnie and Hector and a backhoe that was older than our marriage. In March of that year, a certified letter arrived from the IRS, a notice of federal tax lien, $340,000, filed against the company, and, because Walter had never bothered to separate the two the way I begged him to, against our house as well. He did not tell me for 11 days. I found the letter myself in a shoebox in the garage, the same way I would find another paper trail 3 years later in a sideboard drawer. And I remember thinking even then that this family kept its worst secrets in the worst hiding places, like the truth was something you could smother under enough clutter. Walter cried at the kitchen table the night I confronted him with it, which I had never seen him do before and have rarely seen him do since. He said the words forced sale, he said the words we lose everything, Doris, the trucks, the equipment, maybe the house. He did not know that I had, 4 years earlier, quietly used a signing bonus and 2 profitable years from the marketing firm I ran under my own name to open something called Meridian Holdings, LLC, structured clean, no ties to the Lindqvist name anywhere a casual search would find it, because a woman raised the way I was raised does not put all her assets under a man's roof, not even a good man's, not after watching my own mother lose a house to my father's name on a deed she never saw. I used Meridian to negotiate directly with the IRS that spring. An offering compromise filed by a tax attorney in Charlotte. I paid in cash draws, so there would be no joint statement, no shared account, nothing Walter or his mother could ever trace back to me by accident. $340,000 became a settled balance of $161,000, paid in full by June, and Lindqvist and Sons kept its equipment, its trucks, and its name. The critical stories belong to the Discovery going forward. And Walter told his mother at Sunday dinner that God had simply worked it out, that the IRS had made an error in their filing and corrected itself. I sat across that table and let him believe it, because I had made a vow to myself in the garage the night I found that shoebox, the same kind of vow I now understand I have made more than once in this family, without ever saying it aloud. I would save what needed saving. I would never once be thanked for it. And I would keep the receipts, every single one, in a folder that had my name on it and nobody else's, filed under a company name that sounded like nothing and meant everything. I want to tell you directly, the way I have never told anyone in that family, exactly what that folder became, because it did not stop at the IRS. In 2019, Bev's dream house went up for sale, the one on the sound side in Nags Head she had talked about since I first met her. White shutters, a widow's walk, 40 yards from water she said smelled different than any water in Ohio. Walter had co-signed a construction loan on it 2 years earlier as a favor to his mother's second husband, Ray, who died before the balloon payment came due, and by the fall of 2019 the note was in default and heading to a forced sale. Nobody in that family had the cash or the credit left to stop. I watched it happen from a distance. I made sure stayed comfortable, through a title company that reported to Meridian and to no one else, and when the note came up, I bought it. Not the house, the note. The debt itself at a discount through Meridian Holdings LLC, care of D. Lindqvist, a name Bev has heard exactly once in her life and never connected to me, because I have never once let her hear it from my mouth. Since November of 2019, every mortgage payment Bev and Ray's estate have made on that house with the widow's walk has gone, eventually, into an account that belongs to me. I have been her landlord in every meaningful sense for 6 years. She has stood on that widow's walk and called it hers in front of 40 relatives, and she has never known that the woman she made Venmo a beach house deposit out loud at her own dinner table already owns the paper under the house she cannot even remember to invite that woman to sleep in. I did not tell Walter any of this that night in the driveway either. I have never told Walter any of this. I sat there until the porch light clicked off on its timer, and I thought about the statement folded in thirds in Bev's sideboard drawer, and I understood that somewhere, somehow, a thread I believed was buried had come loose enough to surface in her house without my knowledge, which meant someone else might already be pulling on it. I went inside, past Walter already asleep in front of the television, down to the small locked file drawer in my home office where the real folder lives, the one with 6 years of statements and one signed note and a stack of documents that could rearrange every seat at that family's table in a single conversation. I held it in my hands for a long moment under the desk lamp. I was not ready. Not yet. I told myself I needed to know first how that statement had gotten into Bev's drawer, before I decided what it meant to finally let this family see the whole ledger. Every column, every year, I had quietly paid for a family that had just voted, out loud, that I should pay for one more thing. I locked the drawer, I turned off the lamp, and somewhere in that house, I already suspected someone else was holding a thread of the same story, waiting to see who would pull it first. 3 weeks passed before Bev called again, and this time her voice had a warmth I hadn't heard since before the vote. "Doris, honey, I was hoping you'd come by Thursday and help me with the menu for the Outer Banks trip." You always know what everyone likes. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone against my shoulder, chopping onions I didn't need to chop, and I let myself believe for exactly 4 seconds that something had shifted. I drove to her house on Thursday with a legal pad full of ideas. Shrimp boil for the first night, Walter's favorite peach cobbler, the low country recipe my mother used to make that Bev had once, years ago, asked for twice. We sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours. She wrote things down in her looping cursive. She laughed at a story I told about the grocery store running out of Old Bay. And for those 2 hours, I was again useful in a specific way that felt almost like belonging. That night, Walter's phone buzzed at the dinner table, and I watched his face change before he said a word. Renee had sent the finalized trip spreadsheet to the family group chat, 7 tabs, color-coded, the kind of document she made for her real estate closings. Walter scrolled, and I watched his thumb slow down on the tab labeled Rooms. "Doris," he said, and set the phone face down like that would undo what he'd read. I picked it back up myself. 6 bedrooms assigned across 4 generations, names next to each one. Bev and the girls in the primary suites, the grandkids doubled up down the hall, Walter's name paired with his brother Craig in the bunk room like they were 15 again. My name was nowhere on that tab. It was on the next one, the one titled Expenses, 3rd row down, next to a dollar figure that read $4,150, my share of the house rental Renee had booked without asking, calculated to the exact fraction of what everyone else owed for a bed I apparently wasn't getting. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect a crying, and it would be a lie to give it to you. I felt something colder settle into my chest, something I recognized from the file drawer in my office, the same stillness I feel when I'm looking at a spreadsheet that doesn't balance and I already suspect why. I closed the laptop Walter had opened between us and I said, I'll pack my own sheets then, since I'm sleeping on a floor I'm paying rent for. Walter didn't laugh. He knew better by then. He called his mother that night while I sat in the next room doing the thing I do best, which is nothing, visibly, while my mind runs 6 moves ahead. I heard fragments. Mom, she's on the money page and not the room page. A pause. Then Bev's voice, tinny through the phone speaker, saying the thing I would carry into that house a week later like a stone in my shoe. She's family enough to help pay for it, Walter. I never said she wasn't. I just think the room should go to blood first this year with the grandbabies getting bigger. Blood first. I turned that phrase over for the rest of that night in the shower, in the dark next to Walter's back, which he kept to me because he didn't know what to say, and men like Walter go quiet when they don't know what to say. Blood first, and I have been married into this family for 26 years, longer than Renee has been alive, and I have written checks to keep 2 of their businesses breathing that no drop of my blood will ever touch. The drive to Nags Head took 4 hours and 10 minutes, and I spent most of it thinking about my mother, who cleaned houses on Tidewater Drive for $11 an hour, when I was young enough to ride along in the back of her Buick with a coloring book, waiting in driveways while she worked. She used to say the people who paid her never once asked her to sit down. I hadn't thought about that in years. I thought about it the whole way down Route 158, past the fireworks stores and the pancake houses, watching the dunes rise up gray and low against a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to storm. The house was enormous, cedar shingled, 7,000 square feet of glass facing the Atlantic. The kind of place that photographs beautifully and costs what it costs because Craig had found it and Renee had booked it and I had, 3 weeks earlier, quietly transferred $4,150 from an account with my name on it into an account with Bev's name on it, because that is what I do. That is what I have always done. I carried my own bags up the steps because no one came down to help, and I found Bev in the great room directing the caterers about where to set up the raw bar. Doris! You made good time, she said, and kissed the N near my cheek, and then, before I'd even set my bags down, the photographer's coming at 5, everyone's changing into the whites and tans we talked about. I laid a blouse out for you on the guest bed, the little one off the kitchen. The little one off the kitchen. I knew that room. It had a window unit instead of central air and a door that didn't quite latch, and it was, I would learn within the hour, not actually meant for me to sleep in at all. At 5 o'clock, the family gathered in the great room in cream linen and pale blue, 22 of them arranged on the wide plank stairs, and the driftwood-colored sectional, champagne flutes with sparkling cider for the kids, real champagne for the adults, and I stood at the edge of it in the blouse Bev had laid out, waiting to be waved in. Renee, camera app open on her phone, doing a head count out loud, got to 21 and called it right, and I understood, standing there in cream linen that matched everyone else's, that 21 was the number that mattered, and I had simply never been part of it. Doris, honey, would you mind helping the caterers set the kitchen table? The kids get hungry before the grown-up dinner. Bev said it lightly, already turning away, already arranging Craig's daughter's hair over her shoulder for the shot. I stood for a second in that doorway between the great room, gold with evening light and clinking glass, and the kitchen, where 2 women in black aprons were unwrapping shrimp cocktail. Then I walked into the kitchen and I ate my dinner at the folding table with the caterers, a woman named Yvonne and a young man named Dev, both of whom were kinder to me in 40 minutes than my mother-in-law had been in 3 weeks. I heard Bev's voice through the pass-through window sometime after the flashes stopped, talking to her sister on the phone, not lowering her voice enough, the way people don't when they've decided you don't count as someone who's listening. No, she's here, she's fine, she's having her dinner in the kitchen with the caterers, it's actually nice for her quieter, she's family enough to help pay for the place. I just don't know that she needs to be in every single picture, Carol, it's for the mantle, it should look like our family. Family enough to pay, not family enough to pose. I set my fork down very carefully on the folding table, the way you set something down when you don't trust your hand not to do something else with it. They voted me a bill, they never voted me a seat. I said it to myself once, quietly, at that folding table, and it settled into my chest exactly the way the file drawer had 3 weeks earlier. Cold and precise, and entirely mine. I told Yvonne I needed some air, and I walked out to my rental car in the gravel lot behind the house, past the outdoor shower and the stacked kayaks, and I sat behind the wheel in the dark with the dome light off, because I didn't want anyone silhouetted in a window to know I was still out there thinking. I called Priya Anand, a colleague from the firm I keep on retainer for exactly this kind of thing. A woman who has drafted 3 different sets of loan documents for me over the years, and never once asked why a bookkeeper from Chesapeake needed the kind of paper usually reserved for people with letterhead. I need you to prepare a formal notice, I told her, watching the porch light throw a long yellow rectangle across the grass, reasserting the Meridian Holdings position on the Nags Head note, and I need the balloon payment on the Whitfield construction rescue loan called due. $612,000 plus accrued interest, the full schedule, not a renegotiation. Pri was quiet for a second, and then she asked me, carefully, the way she always does when she already suspects the answer, whether I was certain whether this was a business decision or something else. It's both, I said. Drafted certified, return receipt, addressed to Beverly Whitfield and to Craig, as the managing member of the construction firm. I want it sent Monday morning. I hung up, and I sat in that dark car a long while, listening to the ocean I couldn't see, thinking about a folder in a locked drawer 4 hours north of me, and a house full of people eating cake off my money, without knowing it was mine to take back. And somewhere behind that porch light, a clock I had just quietly, deliberately, started. The Monday envelope went out at 9:14. I know the exact minute because Priya texted me a photo of the certified mail receipt from the post office on Laskin Road, the tracking number circled in her handwriting, and I stared at it in my office for a full minute before I put the phone face down on my desk and got back to work. Because that was the whole point. I had built a life out of not stopping. That week, I spread the real folder open on my desk for the first time in months. Not the copy I keep in the locked drawer at home, but the working one, the one with tabs. The 2016 lien release from Coastal Trust, signed and notarized the same month Craig's first construction loan went sideways, against Orange Wirecrest. Sat under the 2019 deed transfer that moved the Nags Head cottage out of Whitfield Construction's name and into a trust nobody in that family had ever heard of. Under both of those, 5 years of mortgage statements, every single one paid in full, on time, by a wire from an account with my name buried 3 layers down in the ownership structure. Statements Bev had never once asked to see because, as far as she knew, the house paid for itself, the way everything in her life had always seemed to pay for itself. Ellen, who has the desk across from mine at the firm and has watched me eat lunch alone at that desk for 11 years, leaned over my shoulder Wednesday afternoon and asked what on earth I was building. I told her the truth, most of it, because Ellen has never once repeated anything I've told her in 11 years, and because I needed to say it out loud to someone who wasn't a lawyer billing me by the hour. She went quiet reading the dates, and then she said the thing that made my stomach drop, which was that the Whitfield's 50th wedding anniversary gala was the 22nd, and the return receipt on a certified letter mailed that Monday would land on a signature line sometime in that exact window. You didn't plan that, she said, and it wasn't a question. It was her giving me the chance to say I hadn't, and I didn't take it. I told her I hadn't picked the date on purpose, and that was true, but I also told her I wasn't going to ask Priya to slow it down, and that was the part Ellen understood without me explaining further. Some things you don't engineer, you just decline to get out of their way. I drove home that night with the folder in a canvas tote on the passenger seat, the kind of bag that looks like nothing. And I stopped at the house to grab a sweater before Renee's rehearsal dinner planning call, because somehow I was still on the list for cake tastings even after the porch. Renee met me at the door with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach past her teeth, and when I set the tote down on the hall bench to take off my coat, she looked at it the way she looks at receipts at restaurants. Quick, assessing, already doing math. What's this? She said, and reached toward the bag before I could stop her, and her fingers closed on the torn corner of an envelope sticking out the top, the kind of heavy cream stock a bank uses, a return address she couldn't fully read because I'd folded it under, but she read enough. Meridian something. She let go of it fast, like it had a temperature, and she looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her since we were girls, and I caught her taking $20 from our mother's purse. I told her it was work, bookkeeping paperwork, nothing that concerned her, and I picked the tote back up and carried it upstairs like it weighed nothing, though my hands weren't entirely steady on the banister. Renee didn't say another word about it that night. She just watched me leave with a look that told me she was going to find out what Meridian was, one way or another, and that the clock I'd started in that dark car outside my house was now running faster than I wanted. Gala week arrived the way a storm arrives on the news before it arrives on your street. Plenty of warning, none of it useful. I flew up Thursday for a rehearsal I wasn't asked to help plan but was expected to attend, and Friday afternoon I found myself cornered in the hallway outside the hotel ballroom by Renee, who had clearly been waiting, arms crossed over a garment bag, her voice pitched low so the caterers setting up centerpieces 20 feet away wouldn't hear. "I looked it up," she said. "Meridian Holdings. It's a real estate company. It owns half the commercial block on Route 158, and I don't know what else, and I don't know why my sister has a letter from them in her purse. And I want you to tell me right now before Sunday what you're doing." Her voice cracked on the last word in a way that almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. And I told her, calm as I could manage, that some things weren't hers to know yet, that I needed 48 more hours, and that if she trusted me even a little, she'd let me have them. "Trust you," she said, and laughed, short and ugly. "You voted me the seating chart for a dinner you can't afford, and now you're keeping secrets in your purse like it's evidence. What is it, Doris?" "Is it evidence?" I didn't answer that. I just looked at her until she looked away first, which she did, eventually, the garment bag sliding off her shoulder as she turned. And she walked off toward the elevators without another word, and I stood in that hallway with my heart going hard against my ribs, because 48 hours was a number I'd picked out of the air, and I wasn't sure it was true anymore. What I didn't know until later was that Walter had been in the ballroom the whole time, behind the half-open service door, arranging place cards with a florist, close enough to catch pieces of it. Walter doesn't miss much. He'd heard Meridian, and he'd heard evidence, and instead of confronting anyone, which was never his way, he found a quiet corner after dinner rehearsal and called the family's estate lawyer, a soft-spoken man named Arthur Pell who'd handled the Whitfields' wills and the one deed transfer they'd actually understood, and asked him in that mild voice of his whether Arthur had ever heard of a company called Meridian Holdings in connection with the Nags Head cottage. Arthur, I found out much later, went quiet on the phone for long enough that Walter asked if he was still there. And Arthur, who had drafted exactly none of the paperwork that mattered because Coastal Trust's own counsel had handled the 2016 and 2019 filings, told Walter he'd have to pull the county records and call him back, which is a lawyer's way of saying he already suspected something he didn't want to say out loud on a Friday night before his in-laws' anniversary party. Walter didn't push. He thanked Arthur, hung up, and went back to arranging place cards like nothing had happened. But he watched me differently at dinner that night. Not unkindly, just carefully, the way you watch weather you can't read yet. Saturday the 22nd, the ballroom at the Cavendish Hotel filled with 200 people under gold string lights. A four-piece band playing the songs Bev and her late husband's brother had danced to at their own wedding decades ago, because Bev had never remarried and had built this 50th anniversary as a tribute to a marriage that had ended when Craig's father died, a fact the whole family tiptoed around, and I'd stopped tiptoeing around years ago. Bev stood at the center of it in a champagne-colored dress, holding court, accepting toasts, glowing in a way I hadn't seen since before the funeral, and I sat near the back at a table with Walter and two cousins, watching the door. The courier came in at 8:40, a young man in a windbreaker with a clipboard, clearly uncomfortable walking into a ballroom mid-toast, asking the nearest server where he might find a Beverly Whitfield. And the room did what rooms do. It quieted in ripples, heads turning, someone laughing that maybe it was a surprise gift, a singing telegram, and Bev herself lit up at the attention, smoothing her dress, stepping forward with the practiced grace of a woman who has spent 71 years assuming good news comes to her by default. She signed the little screen with the stylus, thanked the young man like he'd brought her flowers, and turned the thick cream envelope over in her hands for the room to see, holding it up half a beat the way you'd hold up a card before opening it at your own party. And I watched her thumb slide under the flap, watched 200 people watching her, watched Renee go very still 3 tables over, and watched Walter's jaw tighten beside me because he already had a name in his head from a phone call the night before. Bev pulled the letter free, unfolded it once, twice, and I watched the exact moment her eyes found the letterhead at the top of the page. The same 3 words that had torn a corner of envelope in my bag a week earlier. Meridian Holdings. And I watched every trace of the party drain out of her face at once, the way color leaves a photograph left too long in the sun. The silence that followed was not the silence of a woman gathering herself. It was the silence of a woman doing arithmetic she did not want to finish, and I watched her get to the end of it before anyone else in that room did because I had done that same math 9 years earlier, sitting at my kitchen table in Raleigh with a stack of foreclosure notices I'd bought for 11 cents on the dollar and a legal pad where I'd written her name, Beverly Ann Whitfield, next to an address on Sound Drive in Nags Head, and felt nothing but the flat click of a puzzle piece finding its slot. Bev? Walter's voice cracked across 3 tables before I'd even stood. What is it? She didn't answer him. She was reading the letter a 3rd time as if a 4th reading might change the letterhead, might turn Meridian Holdings back into something ordinary. A birthday card. A golf club renewal. Anything that wasn't a formal notice of a balloon payment coming due on a note she'd taken out against her own house in 2018 and quietly refinanced twice since. Always one signature away from losing the roof her whole identity was built under. I stood up. My chair scraped the parquet loud enough that even the band 4 tables back stopped mid-phrase, and 200 faces that had spent an hour watching Bev and Walter cut a 50th anniversary cake turned instead to watch me. I can explain the letter, if you'd like, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, steady the way it gets when I've rehearsed something in the shower for 3 mornings straight and finally get to say it out loud to the person it's for. Since it's addressed to you and it's about me. Renee's fork hit her plate. Somewhere behind me, a woman I didn't know whispered, "Who is that?" to her husband. And her husband, one of Walter's old fishing buddies, said, "That's Wesley's wife," in a tone that told me exactly how invisible I'd been to this family for 2 decades. A footnote to my husband's first name. 8 years ago, I said, Whitfield Marine Supply missed payroll twice in 1 quarter. Walter took a private loan against the Nags Head house to cover it through a broker named Colton Reyes because the bank had already said no. Bev, you co-signed. The rate was 9.25%, interest only for 5 years, and it reset to a balloon this March. Colton Reyes sold that loan and 11 others to a fund in 2019. I bought the fund out of a distressed portfolio in 2021 through my company, Meridian Holdings, for reasons that had nothing to do with any of you, because I didn't even know your loan was in it until my analyst sent me the servicing file 8 months later, and I saw the address. Bev's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it, which I had genuinely never witnessed in 8 years of Thanksgivings. I could have called it due the day I found out, I said. I didn't. I restructured it myself, quietly, at 4.5%, and I've been the one approving every extension since, including the one Walter asked for in January when the shrimp season ran short. That's not the only thing. I looked at Walter, and something in his face was already breaking open. The particular collapse of a man who has just watched a fact rearrange 8 years of memory in real time. The forklift repair in 2020, the roof on the Elizabeth City warehouse, Kaylee's braces, Renee, the ones you told everyone came out of your bonus. I paid all of it through accounts that never had my name on the check because every time I offered it with my name on it, somebody at this table found a way to make it small. That's not, Renee started and stopped because there was nowhere for that sentence to go that wasn't a lie in front of 200 witnesses. This past May, I said, and I made myself look at Bev directly for this part. You sat at the head of the family table and put a vacation to Amalfi to a vote. 6 adults, $4,800 a head, and you looked right at me and said I could pay my part or stay home. Since I wasn't really coming for the family anyway, I was coming for the free trip. I stayed home. I want you to understand I wasn't hurt because I couldn't afford the vacation, Bev. I could have chartered the boat. I was hurt because in 20 years, not one of you ever once asked what I actually did for a living. You just decided, and then you handed me a bill for a table I'd apparently never been sitting at. My voice didn't rise. I promised myself it wouldn't, and it didn't. But I let the next 4 words land the way you set down something heavy, deliberately, so everyone hears the weight of it. They voted me a bill. They never voted me a seat. Walter made a sound I'd never heard a grown man make, half a laugh and half something breaking loose in his chest, and he put his hand flat on the table like he needed it to stay upright. Doris, he said, you paid for the roof, and you sat at the kids' table at Christmas, he said, and now his voice was the one cracking in front of 200 people because your mother-in-law said the good table was for family who'd, and I am quoting her, actually built something here. Bev's hand found the back of her chair like she needed it too. 71 years of a face that had never had to apologize for anything in a public room. was trying to construct an expression it had no practice making, and what came out instead was smaller than fury, smaller than shame, just a woman standing at her own anniversary party, realizing the ground under the house she loved most had belonged to someone she'd sat at the kids' table for 8 years running. "I didn't know," she said, finally, and it came out thin, nothing like the voice that had told a caterer in March exactly how she wanted her lamb. "You didn't ask," I said, not unkindly. "There's a difference, and I think it's the whole difference, Bev. I never hid this to punish anyone. I hid it because the first 3 times I tried to be visible in this family, I got handed a bill instead of a seat, and eventually a person stops raising her hand." Renee was crying now, the real kind, not the kind she cried when she wanted something, and I watched her look at Kaylee's teeth like she was seeing the braces for the first time. 2 tables over, someone's phone was very obviously recording, and I remember thinking, with a strange, calm distance, that I did not care, that for the first time in this family's history, I had absolutely nothing left to hide. I didn't ask for an apology that night, and nobody managed to give one whole enough to matter over cake and string lights with 200 witnesses, so I didn't wait for it. I hugged Walter, who held on a beat longer than either of us expected, and I left the balloon payment letter on the table in front of Bev, unclaimed, the way you'd leave a door open instead of slamming it, and I drove the 4 hours home to Raleigh with the windows down the whole way. 6 weeks later, I went back to Nags Head on my own terms, at my own invitation, and sat on the porch of the house I'd technically had a lien against since 2021, watching the sound turn copper at 6 in the evening the way it does out there in July. And Bev came out with 2 glasses of sweet tea and sat down across from me without saying anything for a long time, which for Bev was its own kind of apology. "I want to forgive the note," I told her, once the light had gone all the way gold. "Not reduce it, forgive it. The balloon, the remaining principal, all of it effective today, and I'll have my attorney send the release next week." I watched her face do something complicated, gratitude fighting pride, fighting 71 years of never once being the one who owed somebody, but I'm not doing it quietly this time. I want it in writing, in a letter you keep, that says exactly what it is and who did it. "And I want one more thing, and this one isn't negotiable the way the money was. Name it," she said. And I noticed she didn't argue, which from Bev Whitfield was closer to surrender than anything I'd heard from her in 20 years. "A real seat," I said. "Not the one nearest the kitchen. Not the one you saved for whoever wrote the biggest check that year. Every holiday, every anniversary, every vote this family ever takes on how to spend money that touches my life. I'm in the room from the start, not consulted after the invoices are already printed. I've spent 8 years making myself small enough to fit at whatever table you left open. I'm done doing the math on how little space I can take up." She reached over and put her hand on mine, and it was the first time in 2 decades that hand had reached toward me instead of past me, and I let it sit there, and I let myself believe it, cautiously, the way you trust a floor you're not sure has finished settling yet. "They voted me a bill once, at a table I wasn't even invited to sit at, and I paid it without a word because that had always been my role in that family, invisible and useful. The roof nobody thanked and the note nobody named. I don't carry that bill anymore, and neither does Bev, but I carry the lesson underneath it, that love without a seat at the table is just a service contract nobody signed, and I'm not renewing that one. Not for anybody, not ever again." If you've ever been the one who quietly paid for a family that never once asked what you actually had to give, tell me where you're watching this from tonight, because I promise you're not the only one at that table who's been doing math nobody else could see. And if the story felt like your own kitchen table for even a minute, stay close, like it, subscribe. There's another one of these waiting for you next week.